Imagine on your long-awaited wedding day, a monster using you like an object and even getting you pregnant. Good morning to everyone watching. My name is Mary Ann Williams, but everyone here in Oak Ridge, Montana knows me as Grandma Annie from the bakery. If you've ever stopped by the farmer's market on Thursday mornings in town, you've probably seen me there. A 78-year-old lady with gray hair always covered by a colorful bandana, selling pies that folks say are the best in this part of the Midwest. Today, after keeping this story inside me for so long, I've decided to share what happened to me. There are certain things we keep buried for so many years that they start to rot inside us. And this story is almost suffocating me from being locked away for so long. I was born in 1945, in a simple wooden house in rural Montana. My father, Arthur, was a man respected by everyone in the area. Owner of a small general store, always wearing a straw hat with a hand-rolled cigarette at the corner of his mouth. He was the type of man who commanded respect, just with a look, you know. But inside our home, well, that was a different story entirely. I grew up in a family where my father's word was law. My mother, poor thing, lived with her head down, always agreeing, always obeying. We were 6 siblings, 4 boys and 2 girls, with me being the youngest. The boys could do everything: go to school, play outside, have freedom. Meanwhile, my sister Sarah and I could barely leave the yard. Proper girls don't wander around, my father would say in a voice that didn't accept any argument. Girls are meant to learn how to take care of the house, cook, and prepare to be wives. And that's how I spent my childhood and youth, under my father's watchful eye. In school, I only completed 4th grade. After that, my father thought I knew enough reading and writing for a woman. The rest of my time was spent helping my mother with household chores and learning to cook. I think that's why, when I met Gerald at 17, I fell in love so quickly. He appeared as a possibility of escape from the prison that was my father's house. Gerald was 25, worked as a truck driver, and had just moved to our town. He was a handsome man with an easy smile who knew how to talk like nobody else. We met at a church fair. I remember helping serve the food when he approached the booth. He looked straight into my eyes and said, "The food must be as beautiful as the cook." I turned as red as a tomato, but I felt something different that day, a flutter in my stomach that I had never felt before. After that day, Gerald started showing up at my father's store frequently. He bought things he didn't even need just to see me, I think. My father soon noticed his intentions, but didn't object when Gerald asked permission to court me. In fact, I think my father was even relieved. A married daughter meant one less mouth to feed. The courtship was short, always supervised. We were never alone. Either my mother, my sister, or one of my brothers was always nearby. Still, in those few moments together, Gerald made me dream of a different life. He told me about the cities he visited with his truck, promised that one day he would take me to see the ocean. "Mary Ann," he would say, "you deserve more than this little life here. With me, you'll see the world." And I believed him. I believed with all the strength of my young and inexperienced heart. Our engagement was announced after 6 months of dating. Gerald put a down payment on a small house in the neighboring town where we would live after we were married. He started buying furniture, little by little, always showing me photos, including me in the decisions. For the first time in my life, I felt respected, valued. The wedding was set for June 1963. I had just turned 18. In the months leading up to it, I could barely sleep from so much anxiety. Finally, I was going to leave my father's house. Finally, I was going to be my own person. Finally, I was going to be able to breathe without that feeling of suffocation. If you're enjoying my story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment below telling me what city you're watching from. An old, curious woman like me is happy to know how far my voice can reach on this internet thing. But let's get back to the story, because things are about to get worse, unfortunately. On the eve of the wedding, there was a small celebration at our house. Nothing too elaborate. We were poor, after all. Just a dinner with close family and some neighbors. Gerald couldn't attend because he had gone to borrow a suit from a cousin in the neighboring town. He would return only the next morning, in time for the ceremony at the church at 10 o'clock. The house was full that night. My aunts were helping with the final preparations, sewing details on my simple dress, but the prettiest our circumstances would allow. My mother had been cooking non-stop since early morning, and the smell of good food filled every room. My brothers came and went, bringing borrowed chairs, fixing up the yard where lunch would be served after the ceremony. Amid all that commotion, my father was strangely quiet, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, smoking his hand-rolled cigarette and observing everything with a look I couldn't decipher. Every now and then, our eyes would meet, and I'd feel a strange chill. There was something different about him, something that made me uneasy without knowing why. When everyone left and the house finally quieted down, I went to the small room I shared with my sister. Sarah had married 2 years before and had come especially for my wedding, so she would be sleeping with me on that last night. But she was still in the kitchen, helping my mother put away the last things. I was arranging my bundle with the few clothes I would take to my new life when the bedroom door opened. It was my father. He closed the door behind him and stood looking at me for what seemed like an eternity. "Tomorrow you're leaving," he finally said, his voice different than usual. "You're going to be another man's wife." "Yes, father," I answered softly, finding this conversation strange. My father had never been one for many words, much less for displays of affection or concern. He came closer, sat on the edge of the bed where I was folding my clothes. He put his hand on my shoulder in a way that made me freeze. "Do you know what happens between a man and a woman on their wedding night?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine in a way that made me want to look away. But I couldn't. Yes, father," I stammered, feeling my face burn. My mother had explained some things to me, and the rest I had heard from married women when they washed clothes at the river. "No, you don't know," he said, his voice now a hoarse whisper. "But I'm going to teach you." What happened in the minutes that followed is something I've tried to erase from my memory for decades. The heavy hand covering my mouth so I wouldn't scream, the heavy body on top of mine, the pain, physical and of the soul, of being violated by the man who should have protected me, the silent tears that streamed down my face as I begged God for it to end soon. When it finally ended, he got up, adjusted his clothes as if nothing had happened, and said before leaving the room, "Now you know. You won't make a fool of yourself tomorrow." I lay there, paralyzed, until I heard my sister arriving. I quickly covered myself, pretended to be asleep. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? My father was respected, a good man in the eyes of the community. And even if they believed, what would happen to my wedding? Would Gerald still want a used woman? I spent the night wide awake, eyes open in the dark, body aching, soul in pieces. In the morning, I got up automatically. I took a bath, got dressed, let them fix my hair. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Empty eyes, forced smile so as not to raise suspicions. I walked to the altar like a sleepwalker. I saw Gerald waiting for me, handsome in his borrowed suit, his eyes shining with happiness. I saw my father beside me, leading me as tradition dictates, the same man who hours before had destroyed something inside me. We said our vows, exchanged rings, received blessings. Throughout the ceremony, I felt my father's gaze upon me, a look from someone who knew he had permanently marked his presence in my life, even when I went far away. That night, in the small room of our new house, when Gerald tried to touch me with all tenderness and respect, I froze. I couldn't explain why. I just cried so much that he got scared, asking what had happened, if he had done something wrong. "I'm just nervous," I lied between sobs. "I need time." Gerald, being the good man he was, respected that. We slept holding hands that first night, and the nights that followed too. It was only after almost a month that I was able to let him touch me, and even then, I closed my eyes tightly so as not to see my father's face superimposing on his. Our married life began like this, with this terrible secret between us, although Gerald didn't know about it. He traveled a lot, sometimes staying away for weeks with his truck. I stayed at home, trying to build some normality, trying to forget. Little by little, I adapted to the role of wife. I learned to smile when he arrived, to respond to his displays of affection, to pretend everything was fine. But inside me, something had broken forever that night. I thought the worst had already passed that terrible night with my father. Little did I know that life still had more pain in store for me. After almost 2 months of marriage, I realized my period wasn't coming. At first I thought it was stress, my body reacting to so many changes. But when it completed 3 months late, there was no more denying it. I was pregnant. The news that should have brought joy brought panic. I started doing calculations, remembering dates. Gerald and I had only been intimate after almost a month of marriage. Before that, only that night had happened. With my father, despair consumed me from the inside like fire in dry straw. The child growing inside me wasn't my husband's, but my own father's. Back then, in 1963, there weren't these tests they do nowadays to confirm who a child's father is. There was no way to prove anything, and even if I could, how would I explain the situation? Who would believe me? How would I tell Gerald? All he knew was that we had finally consummated our marriage, and as far as he understood, this baby was the fruit of our love. When I told Gerald about the pregnancy, he nearly exploded with happiness. He spun me around the living room, made plans, even started making a wooden crib on the weekends when he was home. "It's going to be a boy," he said with conviction. Strong like his father, and with his mother's soft heart. Every word of his joy was a stab in my chest. Guilt was consuming me, but fear was even greater. If I told the truth, I would lose everything: my marriage, my home, my dignity. At best, Gerald would throw me out of the house. At worst, he might even kill me in a fit of rage, and who would condemn him? Back then, in rural Montana, washing honor with blood was still something many men considered their right. So, I did what many women before me had done when cornered by fate. I swallowed my tears and moved forward. I pretended everything was fine, that the pregnancy was only a cause for joy. I accepted congratulations from neighbors, advice from older women, gifts from friends. On the outside, I was the image of the radiant young wife. On the inside, I died a little each day. My belly grew, and with it, my anguish. On nights when Gerald was away on trips, I would cry myself to sleep, hugging my own belly, asking forgiveness from that innocent child for all the confusion they would be born into. I would whisper, "It's not your fault, my child. It's not your fault." My mother came to visit when I was in my 6th month. She brought some supplies, little clothes she had sewn for the baby, and the inevitable family stories. Among them, she told me that my father had been acting strange, quieter than normal, drinking more than usual, sometimes disappearing for days. "I think he misses you, daughter," she said innocently. "He was always very attached to you, even if he didn't show it." I needed all my self-control not to vomit right there. The mere mention of my father gave me worse nausea than the pregnancy. I quickly changed the subject, asking about my brothers, about news from town, anything to distance him from my thoughts. Before leaving, my mother held my hands and said, looking into my eyes, "Your father really wants to come meet his grandchild when they're born. He never says it, but I know he's proud." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. "No, Mom," I replied firmly, perhaps too firmly. "I prefer to wait until the baby is a bit older. Newborns are too fragile for the journey here." It was a weak excuse, but it was the only one I could invent at the moment. The truth is that the idea of my father near my child, his child, caused me an indescribable dread. I wouldn't allow him to get close to the child, even if I had to flee to the ends of the earth. Sophia was born on a rainy March dawn in 1964. It was a difficult, prolonged labor, 20 hours of pain that seemed endless. Gerald was on the road and couldn't make it in time. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, an experienced midwife who helped me bring that child into the world. When I finally heard the cry and Mrs. Wilson placed the baby in my arms, all bloody and perfect, something strange happened inside me. I expected to feel rejection, even disgust, for that girl who carried the blood of my abuser. But what I felt was a love so great, so overwhelming, that it barely fit in my chest. I looked at that little red, wrinkled face and saw only my daughter. Not my father's daughter, not the proof of my torment, just my daughter, blood of my blood. "She's a beautiful, strong girl," said Mrs. Wilson, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "What will you name her?" "Sophia," I answered without hesitation. It was my maternal grandmother's name, the only person who had given me true affection in childhood. Sophia meant wisdom, and I prayed that my daughter would have the wisdom to overcome the weight of the blood she carried, even without ever knowing it. Gerald arrived 2 days later, exhausted from the trip he had interrupted upon hearing of the birth. He entered the room where I was nursing Sophia, his eyes wide with emotion. He approached slowly, as if afraid to break that scene, and looked at his daughter with so much love that my heart tightened with guilt. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching Sophia's tiny hand with his finger. "Just like you, Marianne." I thanked God at that moment that Sophia didn't take after my father at all. She had my features, my eyes, my nose. Nothing about her revealed her true origin. It was a small miracle amid the nightmare I was living. The first months with Sophia were about adaptation. Gerald managed to reduce his trips for a while, staying home more to help me. He was a dedicated father, changed diapers without complaining, got up in the middle of the night when the baby cried, sang lullabies with his off-key but love-filled voice. Seeing that scene, I often found myself thinking that, despite everything, Sophia was lucky. She might not know her biological father, and that was a blessing, but she had a real father, a man who loved her unconditionally. When Sophia was 6 months old, I received the visit I had dreaded so much. My father showed up without warning one afternoon when Gerald was working. I opened the door, and there he was, the same straw hat, the same cigarette at the corner of his mouth, but with more wrinkles and white hair than I remembered. "I came to meet my granddaughter," he said simply, as if he had every right to be there. I stood paralyzed at the door, unable to invite him in, unable to send him away. Sophia was in the makeshift crib in the living room, sleeping peacefully. Her cry at that exact moment was like a divine sign, an excuse to move away from him. "She woke up," I murmured, turning my back to attend to my daughter's call. I picked Sophia up, holding her against my chest as if I could protect her with just the strength of my embrace. When I turned around, my father had already entered and closed the door behind him. He was standing in the middle of the living room, watching me with Sophia in my arms. "Let me see her," he asked, taking a step in my direction. "No," I responded instinctively, backing away. The word came out before I could think, strong and definitive. He frowned, surprised at my refusal. In all my life, I had never said no to him. "What's wrong, Marianne? Why are you like this? I just want to see my granddaughter." "She's not your granddaughter," I replied, my voice trembling but determined. "She's nothing to you." At that moment, I saw understanding cross his face like lightning. He understood what I meant. He understood that I knew Sophia was his daughter, not his granddaughter. His face hardened. His eyes became colder than I had ever seen. "Be careful what you say, girl," he threatened in a low voice. "Some things are better left buried." "Go away," I asked, feeling my legs weaken but standing firm. "Go away and never come back. I don't want you near my daughter, ever again." He stared at me for a long moment, as if assessing whether it was worth insisting or not. Finally, he put his hat back on his head and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "You owe obedience to your father, Marianne. Always. Don't forget that." After he left, I fell sitting on the floor, still hugging Sophia, and cried like I had never cried before. I cried out of fear, out of anger, out of momentary relief. I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Men like my father don't accept a no from a woman, much less from a daughter. When Gerald arrived that night, he immediately noticed something was wrong. I was pale, restless, constantly looking out the window. "What happened, Annie?" he asked, concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost told him everything at that moment. I almost opened my heart and poured out all that poison that was corroding me from the inside. But fear was stronger. Fear of losing Gerald, fear of losing Sophia, fear of destroying the family we were building. "It's nothing," I lied. "I'm just tired." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me start, imagining my father invading our house. In the following days, I lived in a constant state of alert. I didn't leave Sophia alone for even a minute, carrying her with me even to go to the yard to hang clothes. Gerald noticed my strange behavior, but attributed it to the fatigue of caring for a small baby. "You need to rest more," he would always say. "Let me take care of Sophia when I'm home." And so the months passed. Sophia grew strong and healthy, oblivious to her mother's torment. She began to crawl, then to take her first steps, to babble her first words. Daddy was one of the first, and how it hurt and relieved me at the same time to hear her call Gerald that. It hurt because it was a constant reminder of the lie I was living. It relieved because, in truth, he was the only father she knew, and God willing, the only one she would ever know. When Sophia turned 1, I received a letter from my mother. Among the routine news and questions about her granddaughter, there was a passage that chilled my spine. Your father is determined to visit you next month. He says he has waited too long to properly meet his granddaughter. We are saving money for the ticket. Panic took hold of me. I couldn't allow him to come, to stay under the same roof as Sophia, to try to establish any kind of bond with her. But how to prevent it without raising suspicions? How to explain to Gerald, to my mother, to everyone that I didn't want my own father around? It was then that I made a drastic decision. We needed to move, far away, to a place where my father couldn't find us easily. I knew it would be difficult to convince Gerald. He had a good job as a driver, knew the routes in the region. We had just settled in that house. But I was determined. That night, when he came home from work, I presented the idea as if it were an old dream. Gerald, I've been thinking. What if we moved to Denver? The big city has more opportunities. You could get a better job, earn more. Sophia could attend better schools when she grows up. He looked at me surprised. Denver? It's so far away. And we don't know anyone there. Exactly why, I insisted. It would be a fresh start. You always talked about showing me the world, remember? Denver would be just the beginning. I argued for days, used every tactic I knew. I talked about opportunities, better salaries, Sophia's future. I didn't mention my father. I didn't mention fear. I didn't give any indication of the real reason behind that sudden desire to move. Finally, after much insistence, Gerald agreed. All right, he said, giving in. Let's try. If it doesn't work out, we can always come back. I wrote to my mother the next day, informing her of the sudden move. I said Gerald had received an irrefusable job offer in Denver, and we needed to move immediately. I asked her to let my father know that, unfortunately, the visit would have to be postponed indefinitely. We sold the little we had, gathered our savings, and in less than a month, we were on a bus headed to Denver. Sophia, just over a year old, slept in my lap, oblivious to the desperate escape we were undertaking. Gerald, beside me, seemed excited about the new adventure. I alternated between the relief of escaping and the fear that somehow my father would discover our whereabouts. The first months in Denver were difficult. The big, noisy, chaotic city was a brutal contrast to the peaceful life in the countryside that we knew. We rented a small room in a boarding house on the east side, where we shared the bathroom and kitchen with 5 other families. Gerald got a job as a helper in a mechanic shop. He earned less than as a driver, but at least he was close to home. I started making pies to sell at the door of the boarding house. I had learned from a neighbor in our previous town, and soon my pies became famous in the neighborhood. We didn't earn much, but it was enough to survive and save a little each month, dreaming of a better house to raise Sophia. Life went on like this for almost 2 years. Sophia grew beautiful and smart, talking nonstop, running through the boarding house hallway, making friends with all the children. Gerald, with great effort, managed to be promoted to mechanic in the shop, which improved our financial situation a bit. I continued with my pies, which I now sold at a small improvised stand at a nearby market. It was at this market that the past caught up with me. I was concentrated on baking a batch of pies when I heard a voice that made me freeze. I can't believe I found you, my daughter. I raised my eyes, and there was my father, older, more worn out, but with the same look that haunted me in nightmares. He had found me. How did you find me? I asked, my voice almost disappearing. It wasn't easy, he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But a father always finds his daughter, no matter where she hides. I discovered later that he had followed clues. Letters from my mother that vaguely mentioned where we were, conversations with acquaintances who had relatives in Denver, a methodical and patient search that lasted almost 2 years. And now he was there, in front of me, like a nightmare materializing in broad daylight. What do you want? I asked, looking around to make sure Sophia wasn't nearby. She usually stayed with a neighbor when I worked at the market, but sometimes she came to visit me. To see my granddaughter, he answered simply, as if it were the most natural request in the world. Or should I say, my daughter. The blood froze in my veins. It was the first time he openly admitted it, confirming what I already knew, but still desperately tried to deny to myself. Go away, I whispered angrily. There's nothing of yours here. Yes, there is, he insisted, his voice low but threatening. And if you don't allow me to see her willingly, I'll tell everything to your husband. How do you think he'll react to knowing he's raising my daughter as if she were his? It was the threat I feared most, my worst nightmare taking shape in his words. I was left without reaction, paralyzed between fear and anger. I'll be staying at the Johnson Inn, near the church, he continued, as if we were discussing a simple family meeting. I'll be there for a week. I expect your visit with the girl. If you don't show up by Thursday, I'll look for your husband at the shop. And with that, he turned his back and left, leaving me shaking so much that I had to lean on the counter to avoid falling. I spent the next few days in agony. I couldn't give in to his blackmail. Allowing him to get close to Sophia was unthinkable, but I also couldn't risk Gerald discovering the truth in that brutal way. What to do? Where to flee this time? It was on that night, as I was debating between impossible options, that Gerald came home earlier than usual. He was pale, his hands trembling. He sat at the table in our small kitchen and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. A man came looking for me at the shop today, he said, his voice controlled but tense. He said he was your father. My world collapsed at that instant. He hadn't waited until Thursday. He hadn't even given me that chance. What did he want? I asked, knowing the answer but trying to buy time, trying to think of some way out. He wanted to talk about Sophia, Gerald replied, still staring at me fixedly. About how she isn't my daughter. The ground disappeared beneath my feet at that moment. The secret I had kept for so long, the truth I had buried in the depths of my soul, was now exposed like an open wound. I looked at Gerald and saw in his eyes a mixture of confusion, anger, and pain that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. What exactly did he tell you? I managed to ask, my voice almost disappearing. Gerald ran his hand over his face, suddenly looking much older than his 30 years. He told me that Sophia isn't my daughter, that when we got married, you were already pregnant by another man, that you lied to me all this time. He hit the table hard, making the plate that was there jump. Is it true, Marianne? Tell me it's not true. At that moment, I could have made up any story. I could have said my father was crazy, that he was trying to separate us for some obscure reason, that it was all a lie. But looking at the man who had been my safe harbor all those years, who had loved Sophia as his own daughter, who had given me a life I never dreamed I could have, I couldn't continue with the lie. It's true, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Sophia isn't your biological daughter, but you're the only father she knows, the only father she loves. His face contorted into an expression of pain so deep that I felt as if I had stuck a knife in his chest. He stood up abruptly, the chair falling to the floor with the movement. How could you? He shouted, forgetting for a moment that Sophia was sleeping in the room next door. How could you lie to me all these years? Make me believe that girl was mine? Make me love her as— His voice failed. As angry as he was with me at that moment, the love for Sophia was real. It couldn't be undone with a revelation, no matter how painful. Who is the father? He asked after a long silence, his voice now lower, contained. Is it someone from our town? Someone I know? This was the question I feared most. The question I couldn't answer without completely destroying our family, without forever tainting Sophia's image. How to tell him that our girl's father was also my father. How to explain the horror that had happened on the eve of our wedding. It doesn't matter who it is, I replied, trying to buy time. It was just once, before we got married. A terrible mistake that never happened again. Please, Gerald, you have to believe me. Doesn't matter? He laughed without humor. Of course it matters. I spent 3 years believing I had a daughter, and now I discover I raised another man's child. I have the right to know who he is. At that moment, Sophia began to cry in the room, awakened by the shouts. Instinctively, I got up to go to her, but Gerald held me by the arm. "Don't run away from this conversation," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "Who is Sophia's father?" Sophia's crying increased, now calling, "Mommy, Daddy," with that little voice that always melted our hearts. I saw Gerald's face change upon hearing that call. For an instant, all the anger gave way to a deep sadness. "Go," he said finally, releasing my arm. "Go calm her down. But this conversation isn't over." I ran to the room, picked Sophia up in my arms, rocking her and whispering words of comfort while my own tears wet her hair. The girl soon calmed down, going back to sleep in my arms, oblivious to the hurricane that was devastating our family that night. When I returned to the kitchen, Gerald was no longer there. He had left without saying where he was going, without saying if he would return. I spent the night awake, cradling Sophia, looking out the window at every sound of footsteps in the street, praying for him to come back, for him to give me a chance to explain, even without knowing how to explain something inexplicable. He returned the next morning, his red eyes betraying a sleepless night, smelling of whiskey. He was calmer, though. He sat on the edge of the bed where I was with Sophia and stared at her for a long time, as if searching in her features for some sign of the truth that had been hidden from him. "I need to know, Mary Ann," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I need to know who her father is." "Why, Gerald?" I asked, desperate. "What will it change? You are her father in all the ways that matter. She loves you as a father. You love her as a daughter. Why do we need to bring this person into our lives? Because I need to understand. I need to know why you did this to me. If it was someone you loved, if it was—" He stopped suddenly, a new suspicion arising in his eyes. "Was it by force? Did someone force you?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. It was the first time someone had put into words what had happened, even without knowing exactly. I felt as if a dam inside me had broken, and before I could control it, the words began to come out between sobs. "Yes," I confessed, hugging Sophia tighter, as if I could protect her from the terrible truth. "Yes, it was by force, on the eve of our wedding." I saw Gerald's face change, anger giving way to shock, then to understanding, and finally to a compassion I didn't expect to see so soon. "Who?" he asked, his voice now a tense whisper. "Who did this to you, Annie?" I lowered my eyes, unable to face him as I said those words. "My father," I whispered, so low that he had to lean in to hear. It was my father. The silence that followed was the longest and heaviest of my life. When I finally gathered the courage to look at Gerald, I saw on his face an expression I will never forget. A mixture of horror, disgust, and such great fury that it frightened me. "Your father?" he repeated, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "Your own father did this to you? And then he came here to see Sophia?" I nodded, unable to speak anymore. The whole story I had kept buried for 3 years came out little by little. The night before the wedding, the fear that prevented me from telling the truth, the discovery of the pregnancy, my father's visit, the escape to Denver, and now, finally, him finding us. Gerald listened to everything in silence, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. When I finished, he stood up and walked to the window, looking at the busy street outside. "Where is he?" he asked after a long silence. "At the Johnson Inn, near the church," I replied, feeling a chill as I remembered my father's words. "But Gerald, don't do anything. Please, he can hurt you. He can hurt us even more." Gerald turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw tears in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me before, Annie? Why did you carry this burden alone? I would have understood. I would have helped you. We would have faced this together." "I was afraid," I confessed, tears coming back with force. "Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid that even if you believed, you wouldn't want to marry me anymore, wouldn't think I was clean enough. Afraid of losing the only chance at happiness I had in life." He approached, sat beside me on the bed, and, to my surprise, hugged me. A strong, protective hug that said more than any words could say. "I love you, Mary Ann," he said, his voice breaking. "I've loved you since the first day I saw you at that church fair. Nothing your father did changes that. And Sophia?" He looked at the girl sleeping peacefully between us. Sophia is my daughter. No matter how she came into the world, she is my daughter here." And he pointed to his heart. At that moment, for the first time in 3 years, I felt I could truly breathe. The weight of the secret had been lifted, and even amid the storm we still faced, there was a light of hope. "What are we going to do now?" I asked, uncertain. "First, I'm going to make sure your father never gets near you two again," Gerald replied, a steely determination in his voice. "Then, we're going to start over. Maybe in another place, where no one knows us, where Sophia can grow up without this shadow." "But what are you going to do with my father? He's dangerous, Gerald. I don't want you to get hurt because of us." "I won't get hurt," he assured, "and I won't do anything stupid. But he needs to understand that he will never get close to my family again." Gerald left shortly after. He said he was going to talk to my father, make things clear. I stayed at home, trembling with fear, imagining 1,000 terrible scenarios. What if my father hurt Gerald? What if he called the police, made up some story? What if Gerald lost control and did something that would send him to jail? The hours dragged on like days. Sophia woke up, played, ate, happily oblivious to the drama unfolding. Looking at her, so innocent, so full of life, I wondered how something so pure could have emerged from such a terrible act. It was a daily reminder that, even in the darkest situations, life finds a way to flourish. Gerald returned at the end of the afternoon. He seemed exhausted but strangely at peace. There were no signs of a fight, nor of drinking. He sat beside me on the bed and held my hands. "It's done," he said simply. "He won't bother you anymore." "What did you do?" I asked, fearful of the answer. "I talked to him. I made it clear that I know everything, that Sophia is my daughter in the eyes of the law and God, and that if he tries to approach you again, I'll go to the police and tell everything. I know it might be difficult to prove after so long, but the scandal would be enough to destroy his reputation in that small town. That's what men like him fear most, losing the mask of respectability." "And he accepted it just like that? So easily?" Gerald gave a sad smile. "It wasn't easy. He denied everything at first, then tried to threaten me, then tried to bribe me. But when he saw that none of it worked, that I wasn't afraid of him, he finally gave in. He said he'll leave tomorrow morning and never look for us again." I wanted to believe, desperately wanted to believe it would be that simple, but I knew my father too well to think he would give up so easily. "I don't trust him, Gerald. He might be saying this just to buy time, to plan something." "I don't trust him either," he admitted. "That's why I think we should move again, farther this time. I was thinking about California. I have a cousin there who can help us find work, a place to stay." "California?" I repeated, frightened by the idea of such a big city, so distant from everything I knew. "Are you sure? It's far enough that he won't find us easily, and big enough for us to get lost in the crowd. We can start over there, Annie. A new life, without these shadows from the past." The idea was frightening, but also liberating. Leaving everything behind, not just the old furniture and cracked pans, but mainly the ghosts that haunted us. Having a real chance to be happy, to raise Sophia without fear, to live the love we felt for each other without that dark cloud hanging over us. "Let's go," I finally agreed. "Let's go to California." The next weeks were of frantic preparations. We sold the little we had, gathered every penny. Gerald quit his job at the shop. I wrote one last letter to my mother, saying only that we were moving again, without mentioning where, asking her not to try to find us. It was painful to cut these last ties, but necessary for our safety. We left on a sunny August morning in 1967. Sophia, now 3.5 years old, was excited about the idea of riding a bus for many days, as we explained to her. Too young to understand the true reasons for the move, she experienced everything as a great adventure. The journey was long and tiring. 3 days on the road, sleeping in cheap inns along the way, eating whatever was available at roadside stops. Sophia, always adaptable, turned each stop into a new game. Gerald, despite the fatigue, maintained that determined look of someone fighting for his family's future. I alternated between the hope of a new life and the fear that somehow the past would catch up with us again. Each time the bus stopped, I looked out the window, afraid of seeing my father among the passengers boarding. Each time someone stared at me for too long, I felt a chill down my spine, wondering if it was someone sent by him to follow us. We arrived in Los Angeles on a muggy afternoon. The city was a shock to our eyes accustomed to smaller towns. The huge buildings, the crowded beaches, the constant movement of people, cars, buses. Gerald's cousin, Oscar, was waiting for us at the bus station. He had secured a small room for us in a boarding house in East Los Angeles, and a helper position for Gerald in the garage where he worked. "It's not much," said Oscar, as he took us to our new home. "But it's a start." The small room was tiny, barely fitting the double bed and a mattress on the floor for Sophia. The bathroom was shared with 3 other families, as was the improvised kitchen in the hallway. But it was ours. It was safe. It was a new beginning. Gerald started working the next day. I, after a few days exploring the surroundings, realized that I wouldn't be able to sell pies there. There were already many street food vendors in the area, and most of them were Mexican food, which I didn't know how to make. I needed to adapt. I learned from a neighbor how to make American and Mexican-style baked goods, foods that Angelinos loved. Soon, I set up a small stand at the neighborhood market, selling these pastries that, to my surprise, were as successful as my pies in Montana. Sophia went with me, helping in the way a nearly 4-year-old could help. Smiling at customers, telling made-up stories, charming everyone with her vivacious personality. The months passed, and slowly we put down roots in that big, chaotic city. Gerald was promoted at the garage, earning enough for us to rent a slightly better place. A tiny apartment, but all our own, without a shared bathroom. Sophia started attending a public preschool near home, where she soon stood out for her intelligence and ease of making friends. I continued with my pastry stand, which gradually grew, gaining fame in the neighborhood. I started receiving orders for parties, which increased our income. For the first time in my life, we had some financial security, some stability. The ghost of my father slowly receded. I stopped looking over my shoulder at every corner, stopped waking up startled in the middle of the night, thinking I had heard his voice. Distance and time were building a barrier that, although fragile, protected us from those memories. Gerald and I were also rebuilding our relationship. The trauma of the revelation about Sophia had left scars, of course, but he kept his word. He never treated Sophia differently for knowing the truth about her origin. On the contrary, he seemed even more determined to be the best father possible, as if he wanted to compensate her for something she didn't even know she had lost. Our intimate life, which had been difficult from the beginning because of the trauma I carried, slowly began to improve. Gerald was patient, respectful, never pressured me. Over time, I learned to separate that terrible night from the expressions of love between us. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of relapse, nights when an innocent touch triggered memories that paralyzed me. But he always understood, always waited, always loved me despite everything. When Sophia turned 5 in 1969, I discovered I was pregnant again. It was a surprise. After trying for so long without success, we had almost given up on the idea of having more children. The doctor at the health clinic said that probably stress and trauma had affected my fertility. And now that we were more calm, my body was finally ready. The news brought a joy we didn't expect to feel again. Sophia was excited about the idea of a little brother or sister. Gerald, although concerned about finances, couldn't contain his happiness. And I felt as if the universe was giving me a second chance. A planned pregnancy, desired, the fruit of true love. In the months that followed, our little family experienced a peace we had never known before. Gerald worked hard. I maintained my stand even with my growing belly. Sophia did well in school and talked non-stop about the baby that was coming. It was as if we had finally left behind that dark shadow that had been haunting us. Until, in the 7th month of pregnancy, we received a letter that changed everything again. The letter was from my mother. The first in almost 2 years since we had moved to Los Angeles. I don't know how she got our address. I suspected that Oscar, Gerald's cousin, might have given some clue, even without knowing the whole story. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. My mother's shaky handwriting, who barely knew how to write, brought news I never expected to receive. My daughter Marianne, I hope this letter finds you well. I have been looking for you for a long time. Your father passed away 2 months ago. He had a stroke while working in the field. He didn't suffer. It was quick. Before he died, he told me everything. About what he did to you on the eve of your wedding. About Sophia. I don't know if you will ever forgive me for not protecting you. I don't know if I will ever forgive myself. I only know that I need to see you, meet my granddaughter, ask for forgiveness in person. If you can find in your heart a place for your mother, please write to me. I'm living with your brother Joseph now. With love and regret, your mother, Margaret. I read the letter several times, tears blurring my vision. My father was dead. The monster of my nightmares no longer existed, and my mother now knew the truth. A truth that she would have to carry for the rest of her life, just as I did. When Gerald came home from work, I showed him the letter. He read it in silence, then hugged me for a long time. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. It was a difficult question. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter, move on as if that chapter of my life was definitely closed. But another part, the part that was still a daughter, that still remembered the few moments of affection my mother managed to show amid my father's oppression, wanted to respond, wanted to give her the chance to meet Sophia, to meet the new baby that was coming. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I need to think." That night was sleepless. Lying beside Gerald, I felt the baby moving in my belly, as if also restless with the news. Sophia slept peacefully in the little room next door, oblivious to the turmoil of emotions her mother was facing. I thought about my mother, that silent and submissive woman who never had a voice in her own home. Had she suspected something? Had she noticed any change in my father's behavior or in mine after that night? Or had the deathbed revelation been a complete shock, a final betrayal from a man who had already betrayed her in so many ways? I thought about Sophia, who had never known a grandmother. My mother-in-law had died even before we met, and now my mother was there, wanting to be part of her life. Did I have the right to deny this to Sophia? To deny her the chance to have another piece of family, especially now that the real danger, my father, no longer existed? And finally, I thought about the baby I was carrying. This son or daughter would be born into a world where his maternal grandfather no longer existed, where the terrible secret that surrounded his sister's birth no longer had the same power to destroy our family. Wouldn't it be better if he were also born into a world where there was reconciliation, forgiveness, healing? After days of reflection, with Gerald's support, I made my decision. I wrote back to my mother, inviting her to visit us after the baby was born. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't even know if I was capable of that yet, but I offered an opening, a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship. Joseph Michael was born on a December dawn in 1969, strong and healthy like his father. Sophia, now almost 6 years old, was enchanted with her little brother, immediately assuming the role of protective older sister. Gerald, who was already a wonderful father to Sophia, melted completely with the son who carried his blood, although never, not for an instant, did he make any distinction between the two children. My mother arrived 2 weeks later. She was older, thinner, her eyes carrying a weight that I recognized well, the weight of guilt, of belated regret. Our reunion was difficult, full of contained tears, choked words, feelings too complex to be expressed. Sophia, with the innocence of children, broke the ice. She approached the grandmother she had never known and simply asked, "Do you know how to tell stories? Daddy tells stories every night, but he always forgets the best parts." My mother smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen on her face in years. "I know many stories, my girl. Stories from the countryside, about animals, ghost stories." "Ghost stories!" Sophia exclaimed, excited. "Tell one now!" And so, around stories, first for Sophia, then for all of us, my mother slowly reconnected with our family. It wasn't easy, nor quick. There were wounds too deep, silences too long between us. But day by day, visit after visit, she ended up moving to Los Angeles to a small room not far from ours. We rebuilt something resembling a mother-daughter relationship. We never talked directly about what my father had done. It was a subject that hovered between us, omnipresent but never mentioned. Perhaps it was better that way. Some truths are too heavy to be put into words, even between people who share the pain. The years went by. Sophia grew up, became a brilliant teenager, determined to study, to be somebody in life. Joseph followed in his father's footsteps, passionate about cars from an early age, helping in the garage that Gerald finally managed to open after years of saving. Our life wasn't perfect. We had financial difficulties, health problems, fights like any family. But we had something that for a long time I thought I would never have: peace. The peace of living without fear, without suffocating secrets, without the constant shadow of a past that threatened to destroy everything at any moment. Sophia never knew the truth about her origin. It was a conscious decision that Gerald and I made together. What good would it do her to know? What purpose would it serve other than to carry a burden that wasn't even hers? Gerald was her father in all the ways that mattered: in love, in dedication, in constant presence. The biological truth was just a dark detail that didn't need to enter her life. My mother, who initially thought Sophia had the right to know, eventually agreed with our decision. "She's a happy girl," she said once, watching Sophia play with Joseph in the small yard of the ground-floor apartment we had moved to. "Your father has done enough harm to this family. He doesn't need to continue doing it after death." And so we continued, building a life that, if not extraordinary in the eyes of the world, was precious to us. A life built on the ruins of a terrible past, but which flourished despite everything, or perhaps, in some strange way, because of everything we had been through. The years passed like water in a river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. Sophia grew up and became a beautiful, studious, and determined young woman. With great sacrifice on our part, she managed to enter nursing school in 1987. She was the first person in the family to step into a university, and the pride we felt couldn't fit in our chests. Joseph, our youngest, really followed in his father's footsteps and became a skilled mechanic. At 18, he was already Gerald's right-hand man in the garage, which had now grown and employed 3 more people. Our life had found a balance that I never thought would be possible after everything I went through. We had our own small but comfortable house in a simple neighborhood in East Los Angeles. My pastry stand had evolved into a small bakery specializing in Montana-style pies, Annie's Montana Pies, which was successful in the neighborhood. My mother, now elderly but still lucid, had been living with us since a heart problem prevented her from living alone. It was a good life. A life that made me thank God every day for giving me the strength to survive that horror and rebuild something beautiful from the ashes. The secret about Sophia's origin remained buried, known only to me, Gerald, and my mother. It was a weight we carried so that Sophia could live free from it. Or so we thought. It was on a September night in 1991 that our carefully constructed world began to crumble. Sophia, then 25, had finished college and worked as a nurse in a public hospital. She was engaged to Lucas, a doctor she met during her internship. He was a good man, from a simple family like ours, who treated her with respect and affection. The wedding was set for December of that year. We were all in the living room after Sunday dinner, a tradition we religiously maintained. Gerald and Joseph were discussing football. My mother was dozing in the armchair. I was fixing some details on the wedding dress we were making to save money. Sophia was quiet, fidgeting with her engagement ring, a distant look that didn't match her usually vivacious personality. "Everything okay, my daughter?" I asked, noticing her restlessness. She looked up at me, and what I saw in her eyes frightened me. A mixture of fear, confusion, and determination that immediately reminded me of myself, decades ago, when I faced my own demons. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice firmer than her look suggested. "With all of you." Something in the way she spoke made the entire room go silent. Even my mother woke from her nap, sitting up more straight in the armchair. Gerald turned off the television. Joseph stopped flipping through the car magazine. All eyes turned to Sophia, who now seemed to be gathering courage to say something difficult. "I'm pregnant," she finally announced. There was a moment of perplexed silence, followed by exclamations of joy. A baby. News that would normally be celebrated with hugs and congratulations. But something in Sophia's face said there was more. Much more. "That's wonderful, daughter," I exclaimed, trying to hide my apprehension. "You and Lucas just started the family a little early, but that's not a problem. The wedding is already around the corner, and— That's not it, Mom, she interrupted, her voice trembling. The problem isn't being pregnant before the wedding. The problem is— She took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage for a dive into deep waters. The problem is that the baby isn't Lucas's. The room fell into a sepulchral silence. Gerald straightened in his chair, his face suddenly serious. Joseph seemed uncomfortable, as if he was witnessing something he shouldn't. My mother put her hand to her chest, a gesture that had become common since her heart problems. What do you mean it's not Lucas's? I asked, trying to stay calm. Sophia, what's going on? She started crying, tears silently streaming down the face that looked so much like mine. I don't know how to tell this. It's so horrible, so impossible. At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something too familiar in that scene, in those words, in that contained despair. Without realizing it, I brought my hand to my mouth, fearing what would come next. It was my father, she said finally, the words coming out as if torn from her throat. The father of my baby is my own father. The room spun around me. I looked at Gerald, who had turned deathly pale. He stood up with a start, his fists clenched. What? That's impossible. Sophia, what are you saying? I never, ever— Not you, Dad, Sophia interrupted him, her voice now strangely calm amid the chaos. My biological father. Time seemed to freeze. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet, as if I was falling into an endless abyss. How did she know? Who had told her? And more importantly, how could her biological father, dead for more than 20 years, be the father of the baby she was expecting? What are you talking about, sis? Joseph asked, completely confused. Our father is Gerald. Always has been. Sophia shook her head, wiping tears with the back of her hand. Not for me. I discovered a few months ago that Gerald is not my biological father. I looked at my mother, who seemed about to faint. Was it her? Had she told Sophia? After all these years keeping the secret? How— I began, but my voice failed. I swallowed hard and tried again. How did you discover this, daughter? I found some old letters, Sophia replied. Letters from Grandma to you, Mom. I was looking for that cornbread recipe in your room, and I found a box under the bed. I didn't want to snoop, I swear, but I saw my name in one of the letters and— I remembered the letters. My mother had written several over the years, and in some of them she mentioned vaguely the secret about Sophia. Never explicitly. We always feared that the letters would fall into the wrong hands, but with references that someone determined could piece together like a puzzle. So I started investigating, Sophia continued. I went to our hometown in Montana. I said it was a work trip, remember? I found people who knew our family. I asked questions, put together pieces of the story. Sophia? Gerald tried to intervene, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. And then I found him, she said, her voice almost disappearing. I found my biological father. Impossible, I whispered, feeling the blood freeze in my veins. He's dead. He died more than 20 years ago. Sophia looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Dead? No, Mom. He's alive. He lives in San Diego now. That's where I found him. The room started spinning again. I felt Gerald grab my arm, supporting me before I fell. Who? I asked, my voice barely audible. Who did you find, Sophia? Arthur Williams, she answered. My grandfather, or rather, my father, alive, in San Diego. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. I had received news of his death. My mother had confirmed it. It was impossible that— I looked at my mother, who was now crying silently in the armchair, her face buried in her hands. And I knew, at that instant, that I had been deceived. That my father's death had been a merciful lie, told by my mother to give me peace, to protect us. Mom? I called, my voice trembling with contained emotion. Is it true? Is he alive? She raised her face, red eyes, trembling hands. Forgive me, my daughter, she whispered. I thought it would be better this way. He had disappeared. No one knew where he was. When I came to Los Angeles, I thought you would be safer if you believed he was dead. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach. So many years living with this lie, believing that the monster of my nightmares could no longer reach me. when in fact he was out there, alive, and had now found Sophia. "What did he do to you?" I asked Sophia, fearing the answer but needing to know. "Did he hurt you?" Sophia lowered her eyes, unable to face me. "It wasn't like that at first," she said softly. "He introduced himself as a distant relative who had known me when I was a baby. He was kind, told family stories, bought me presents. He said he had information about my biological father, but that he needed time to tell me everything." My stomach turned. I knew that tactic well. The calculated kindness, the subtle manipulation, the building of trust for later. "We met several times," Sophia continued. "He always had a new story, a new detail, but never told me who my father was. Until one day, after a few drinks, she stopped, unable to continue. She didn't need to. I knew exactly what had happened. The same horror I had experienced decades ago repeating itself with my daughter, in a perverse cycle that seemed endless. "Only afterwards," Sophia resumed, her voice now almost a whisper, "only afterwards did he tell me the truth, that he was my biological father, that he had been with you before your marriage." The final lie, the supreme manipulation. He hadn't just abused her. He had distorted the truth to seem less monstrous, to make Sophia believe it had been an affair, not a rape, and now she was carrying his child, just as I had carried her. Gerald, who had remained silent, absorbing everything with growing horror, finally spoke. His voice was different, deeper, harder than I had ever heard. "Where is he now?" he asked, his fists still clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. "At a hotel in Beverly Hills," Sophia replied. He followed me to Los Angeles. He said he wants to be part of the baby's life." "No," said Gerald, the word coming out like a growl. "It's not going to happen. Never." Sophia started crying again, her body shaking with sobs. "I don't know what to do. Lucas doesn't know any of this. How am I going to tell him? How can I explain that the baby I'm expecting is from my own? She couldn't finish the sentence. Joseph, who had remained in shock until that moment, approached his sister and hugged her awkwardly, not fully understanding what was happening, but feeling her pain. "Sophia," I called, forcing myself to stay calm despite the turmoil of emotions inside me. "My daughter, look at me." She raised her eyes, red from crying. "There's something you need to know," I continued, feeling that it was time, finally, to tell the whole truth. "Something about your birth, about your biological father." And then, for the first time, I told the complete story. The rape on the eve of my wedding, the discovery of the pregnancy, the decision to raise Sophia as Gerald's daughter, my father's pursuit, the escape to Denver and then to Los Angeles, the lie about his death. I told everything, sparing no details, as tears streamed down my face and everyone's in the room. When I finished, the silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Sophia looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Horror, understanding, perhaps even some relief for finally understanding her own story. "So I am," she began, her voice failing. "You are my daughter," I interrupted firmly, "and Gerald's daughter, who raised you with all the love in the world. Your origin doesn't define who you are, Sophia. It never has." "And the baby?" she asked, placing her hand on her still flat belly. "What do I do with this baby?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. It was an impossible decision, a terrible crossroads in my daughter's life, and, ironically, one that I never had to face. When I discovered I was expecting Sophia, abortion wasn't an option I even considered, both because of my beliefs and the complete lack of access to something like that in rural Montana of the 1960s. But we were in 1991, in Los Angeles. Sophia had other possibilities, other paths. "That's a decision only you can make," I finally replied. "But whatever your choice, we'll be by your side. All of us." I looked at Gerald, who nodded gravely. Even amid the anger he felt toward my father, even amid the shock of the situation, his love for Sophia spoke louder. He would be her safe harbor, just as he had been mine. "First," said Gerald, his voice now more controlled, "we need to deal with him, with Arthur. He's dangerous," I warned. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I know," Sophia replied softly. "Now I know." The pain in her voice broke my heart. My daughter, whom I had tried to protect all her life, had been reached by the same evil that had struck me. History had repeated itself despite all our efforts to rewrite the past. "I won't let him get near you again," said Gerald, the iron determination in his voice. "Not you, not the baby, if you decide to have it." "But how?" I asked, fear consuming me. "He always finds a way. Always." "This time it's different," Gerald replied. "We're not that young, frightened couple anymore, fleeing in the middle of the night. We have an established life. We have resources. We have people who can help us." He stood up, picked up the phone, and started dialing a number. "I'm going to call Richard," he said, referring to a lawyer friend who occasionally helped us with issues at the garage. "We're going to get a restraining order against him, and then we're going to the police." "Police?" I repeated, frightened. "But what proof do we have? It was so long ago." "We have Sophia's testimony," Gerald responded firmly. "And if he did this to you, to her, he probably did it to other women too. The police can investigate, find other victims." The idea of publicly exposing our secret, of reliving all that horror in police stations and courts, terrified me. But looking at Sophia, at the despair in her eyes, I knew we had no choice. The cycle needed to be broken, once and for all. The night extended into discussions, tears, planning. Joseph, still trying to process everything he had heard, offered to sleep on the living room couch to stand guard, a naive but touching gesture of protection. My mother, devastated by the revelation that her lie hadn't protected us as she had hoped, ended up taking a sedative and going to bed early. Sophia decided to stay with us that night, unable to return to her own apartment, where she had lived alone since she started working. "And Lucas?" she asked at one point. "How am I going to tell him?" It was the most difficult question of all. How to explain something like this to the man she loved, who planned to marry her in a few months? How to ask him to accept a baby conceived in those circumstances? "With the truth," I finally replied. "If he truly loves you, he'll understand. He'll support you, as Gerald supported me." "And if he doesn't support me?" she asked, the fear evident in her voice. "Then he's not the man we thought he was," Gerald replied simply. "And you deserve someone better." The next morning, exhausted but determined, we put our plan into action. Richard, the lawyer, came early to our house. He listened to the entire story with a professionalism I appreciated, without judgments, without excessive horror, just noting important details and asking pertinent questions. "We can easily get a restraining order," he said, after hearing everything. "With Sophia's and your testimonies, there's sufficient basis. As for the criminal case, it will be more complicated given the time passed, but not impossible, especially if, as we suspect, there are other victims." The plan was simple. Sophia would arrange a meeting with my father at the hotel where he was staying. She wouldn't go alone, of course. Gerald and 2 police officers who were friends of Richard would be nearby, ready to intervene. At the right moment, we would confront my father with the truth and the police presence, delivering the restraining order and informing him about the process we were filing. "It's risky," Richard warned. "Men like him can react violently when cornered." "That's why the police will be there," Gerald replied. "We're not going to give him a chance to escape this time." Sophia was nervous, but determined. "I want to look him in the eyes," she said. "I want him to know that I discovered the truth, that I'm no longer an innocent victim he can manipulate." I reluctantly agreed to the plan. Part of me just wanted to flee again, take my family, and disappear to somewhere my father would never find us. But another part, the part that had carried this burden for almost 3 decades, yearned for a confrontation, for justice, for a definitive end to that nightmare. Before we left, Sophia asked to speak with me alone. We went to the backyard, where the small jasmine bush I had planted years before perfumed the morning air. "Mom," she said, holding my hands, "before we confront him, I need to tell you something." "What, my daughter?" "I've decided to keep the baby," she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "I know it might seem crazy, but I remembered what you told me, about how you loved me from the first moment, despite everything. I feel I can do the same." I hugged my daughter tightly, feeling her body tremble against mine. How many times had I dreamed of this moment, not of the terrible revelation, but of the deep understanding between us? How many times had I wondered if Sophia would understand my choices, my secrets, my sacrifices? Are you sure? I asked, pulling away to look into her eyes. It's a very difficult decision, Sophia. Very personal. I am, she replied. And there's more. I talked to Lucas last night after I left here. My heart skipped a beat. And how did he react? A small smile, the first since this whole storm began, appeared on her face. He cried with me. He was horrified, furious with my grandfather. But then he said something I'll never forget. What? He said that true love isn't just for the good moments. It's mainly for the bad moments, when we need it most. And that he loves me no matter what happens. That he will love this baby as if it were his, because it's mine, and everything that's mine, he loves. Tears came to my eyes. How many times had Gerald told me similar words over the years? Words that sustained me, that gave me strength to move forward. Sophia had found her Gerald, a good man, strong enough to love beyond circumstances, to see beyond the shadows of the past. He's a lucky man, I said, wiping away tears. Having you is the greatest blessing of his life, even if he doesn't know it yet. Sophia smiled again, a sad but determined smile. He said the same thing about you and Dad, about you and Gerald. He said you are an example for him, of how love can overcome anything. I hugged my daughter again, feeling a strange peace amid the chaos. Maybe this is what they called redemption. Not the erasure of the past, but its transformation into something that, despite the pain, also brought growth, understanding, even a peculiar form of beauty. Are we ready? Gerald called from the back door, interrupting our moment. Sophia wiped away her tears, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. We are, she answered, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Let's end this once and for all. And so, we set off for the confrontation that would define not only our future, but would also finally free our past. The path would be difficult, the battle would be hard, but for the first time in decades, I felt that victory was possible. That the monster of my nightmares, and now of my daughter's nightmares, would finally be defeated. The hotel in Beverly Hills where my father was staying was one of those decadent places that had seen better days. Peeling paint on the walls, stained carpet in the lobby, an air of neglect that perfectly matched the man we had come to confront. We arrived in 2 cars, Gerald, Sophia, and I in one, Richard and the 2 plainclothes police officers in the other. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked Sophia for the 1,000th time as we waited in the lobby. We can still change our mind. Do this another way. She squeezed my hand, her eyes fixed on the elevator door. I am, Mom. I need to look him in the eye. I need him to know that he no longer has power over any of us. Sophia had called my father earlier, setting up a meeting in the hotel restaurant. He didn't know we would all be coming, didn't know that police officers would be waiting in a discreet corner, didn't know that his life of abuse and manipulation was about to end. When the elevator opened and he stepped out, for a moment, I didn't recognize him. The imposing man who terrorized my nightmares had transformed into a stooped old man, thin white hair, deep wrinkles marking a face that no longer inspired fear, only contempt. He wore a cheap, wrinkled suit and walked with the help of a cane. His eyes, however, were the same. Cold, calculating, assessing the environment like a predator. When he saw us, not just Sophia, but all of us, he paused for a moment. I saw recognition in his gaze when he identified me, quickly followed by something that seemed almost like amusement. Mary Ann, he said, my name coming out as a harsh sigh from his lips. Long time. I felt Gerald stiffen beside me, his fists clenched. I put my hand on his arm, silently asking for calm. It wasn't time to lose control. Arthur, I replied coldly, refusing to call him father. Seems like you found a way to come back from the dead. He gave a crooked smile, revealing yellowed teeth. Your mother always had a fertile imagination. Convenient for you to believe me dead, wasn't it? What wasn't convenient, Sophia intervened, stepping forward, was you appearing in my life, lying about who you were, and then... Her voice faltered for a moment, but she regained her composure. And then, doing what you did. My father looked at Sophia with an almost affectionate expression, which made my stomach turn with disgust. My granddaughter. Or should I say my daughter? You look so much like your mother at her age. I couldn't resist when I found you by chance at that hospital in San Diego." "By chance?" I asked, suspicion clear in my voice. "Or did you deliberately look for her?" He shrugged, leaning more on his cane. "What's the difference? Fate brought us together. Isn't that what matters? And now we have a new family member on the way." The naturalness with which he spoke of his crime, of his manipulations, left me breathless. It was as if, in his distorted mind, there was nothing wrong with what he had done, neither to me so many years ago, nor to Sophia now. "There will be no family reunion," said Gerald, his voice controlled but full of a contained anger he rarely showed. "We came here to make some things clear." My father assessed him with a look of contempt. "Ah, good Gerald. Always ready to raise other men's children, isn't that right? First Sophia, now this baby, a very understanding man." Before Gerald could react to the provocation, Richard approached, the two police officers discreetly positioning themselves near the exits of the lobby. "Mr. Arthur Williams," said Richard in a professional tone. "My name is Richard Thompson. I'm the family's attorney. I have here a restraining order that prohibits you from approaching or contacting Sofia Hernandez or any member of her family." He extended the document, which my father completely ignored, his eyes still fixed on me. "And also," continued Richard, imperturbable, "I came to inform you that a formal complaint has been filed against you for crimes of rape and sexual abuse. The police would like to take your statement." It was then that I saw, for the first time in my life, something I had never seen on my father's face: fear. For a fleeting instant, control slipped, the mask fell, and he seemed what he really was, a frightened old man, caught in his own crimes. But the moment passed quickly. He composed himself, the crooked smile returning to his lips. "What is this talk about?" he asked, his voice now carrying a poorly disguised irritation. "Rape? Abuse? Sophia came to me voluntarily. We had a consensual relationship. She's an adult, for God's sake." "Under false pretenses," Sophia replied, her voice surprisingly firm. "You introduced yourself as my grandfather, gained my trust, got me drunk, and only afterward told me who you really were. That's not consent. And it wasn't just her," I added, stepping forward. "You did the same to me on the eve of my wedding, and probably to other women over the years." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Prove what? Something that supposedly happened almost 30 years ago? Be reasonable, Mary Ann. No one will believe this crazy story." "Maybe not," admitted Richard. "If it were just Mrs. Hernandez's word against yours. But with Sophia's testimony, plus the evidence we're collecting from other possible victims, the case becomes much stronger." The two police officers approached then, discreetly showing their badges. "Mr. Williams," said one of them, "we'd like you to accompany us to the station to provide some clarification." I saw panic grow in my father's eyes. He looked around, as if searching for an escape route, but the officers were already strategically positioned. Cornered, he did the only thing he still could: attack verbally. "You were always ungrateful," he shot at me, his voice filled with venom. "I gave you and your mother a roof, food on the table, and this is how you thank me? Persecuting me with lies, destroying my reputation?" I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say to that man who had destroyed so many lives, including mine and my daughter's. Instead, I stepped forward and did something I never imagined I would have the courage to do. I looked directly into his eyes and smiled. A calm smile, without anger, without fear, the smile of someone who has finally been freed. "It's over, Arthur," I said simply. "Your time is up." He was taken away by the police officers without physical resistance. He was too old for that, but cursing and threatening the whole time. He promised to sue all of us, swore he had powerful friends, guaranteed he would be out of the police station in a few hours. But there was a desperation in his threats that revealed their truth. He knew that this time he wouldn't escape. When the police car drove away, I felt an enormous weight being lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had carried for almost 30 years, since that terrible night that changed my life forever. I looked at Sophia, who was crying silently beside Gerald, and knew she felt the same. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice small, like that of the girl she once was. "Not completely," Richard replied honestly. There will be statements, possibly a trial. It will be a long and sometimes painful process. But the worst is over. He can't hurt you anymore. We returned home in silence, each absorbed in our own thoughts. Joseph and my mother waited anxiously, and when we told them what had happened, there was a mixture of relief and apprehension. The road ahead would still be difficult, but at least now we could see it clearly. That night, Sophia finally called Lucas and asked him to come to our house. It was time to face the next challenge, telling the man she loved the whole truth about her pregnancy, about the origin of the baby she was expecting. Lucas arrived an hour later. He was a tall young man with glasses, with a calm manner that always reminded me a bit of Gerald when he was young. Even without knowing all the details, he already knew that something serious had happened. Sophia had briefly told him on the phone that she had discovered Gerald wasn't her biological father, and that she needed to tell him the complete story. The room fell silent as Sophia and I, alternately, told the whole story. From the rape I suffered decades ago to the recent events with my father. Lucas listened to everything without interrupting, his face getting paler, his hands occasionally closing into fists when the most painful details were revealed. When we finished, the silence extended for several minutes. Lucas looked at Sophia as if seeing her for the first time, not with contempt or disgust as she feared, but with a mixture of horror at what she had gone through and a deep admiration for her courage. He began, his voice failing. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm so sorry you all went through this. I can't even imagine." Sophia took his hands, her eyes pleading. "I understand if you want to cancel the wedding. I understand if you don't want to raise this baby, knowing where it comes from. I just ask that." Lucas interrupted her, placing a finger gently on her lips. "Don't say that. Never say that. I love you, Sophia. I love everything about you. Your strength, your kindness, your heart. What happened wasn't your fault, and it certainly isn't this baby's fault." He turned to me and Gerald, his eyes now determined behind his glasses. "You showed me what true love means. Standing by those we love no matter what happens. I want to do the same for Sophia and for this baby. I want to be the father this child deserves, just as Gerald was for Sophia." Gerald, who rarely showed emotion in public, couldn't hold back his tears. He stood up and hugged Lucas tightly, an embrace that said more than any words could say. The months that followed were intense. My father was formally charged not only for crimes against Sophia, but also against 2 other women who had the courage to come forward after the case gained some local publicity. Because of his age and a convenient diagnosis of heart problems, he won the right to respond to the process in freedom, but with an electronic ankle monitor and prohibited from leaving the city or approaching any of the victims. Sophia and Lucas's wedding was postponed until after the baby was born. Their decision, so that the child would already be part of the ceremony in some way. Sophia's belly was growing, and with it, strangely, a new sense of peace in our family. It was as if, by bringing to light the dark secrets that had haunted us for so many years, we had finally made room for genuine happiness to flourish. Lucas was amazing throughout the entire pregnancy. He accompanied Sophia to all appointments, read books about parenthood, even started preparing the baby's room long before necessary. When they discovered it would be a girl, it was he who suggested the name, Clara. "Because she will bring clarity to our lives," he explained, his hand lovingly on Sophia's belly. "She will be the beginning of a new story, without the shadows of the past." My mother, who had initially been devastated by the whole situation, gradually found peace too. We never talked directly about the lie she maintained for so many years, about my father being dead. But I knew she had done what she believed was best to protect us. Forgiveness came naturally. It didn't need to be formally asked for or granted. Clara was born on a sunny May morning in 1992. A difficult birth, as Sophia's had been, but in the end, when they placed that small bundle in my daughter's arms, I saw on her face the same thing I had felt when I held her for the first time, a love so great, so pure, that it completely transcended the dark circumstances of conception. Lucas, beside her in the hospital bed, looked at mother and daughter with so much love that it was almost palpable. Gerald, holding my hand as we observed the scene, whispered, "It's like a cycle closing, isn't it? Sophia found her Gerald, just as you found yours." I nodded, unable to speak through the tears. That was exactly it. A cycle closing, a wound finally healing, a new generation beginning without the crushing weight of the secrets we had carried for so long. My father's trial began 3 months after Clara's birth. It was a difficult, painful process, with moments when both Sophia and I almost gave up. Reliving those traumas, being questioned by defense attorneys who tried to make us appear liars or confused, facing the cold gaze of the man who had destroyed so many lives. It was almost unbearable, but we supported each other. Our entire family united like never before. Gerald, Joseph, Lucas, my mother, even the other victims who had come forward. We were a united front against the evil that man represented. And we won. In January 1993, my father was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Given his advanced age, 75 at the time, it was practically a life sentence. He wouldn't leave jail alive. When the judge announced the sentence, I didn't feel the euphoria I expected. There were no shouts of joy, no exultant hugs, just a collective deep sigh, as if our entire family could finally release the breath we had been holding for decades. "Is this the end?" asked Sophia, holding Clara in her arms as we left the courthouse. "It's a new beginning," I replied, gently touching my granddaughter's little face. For all of us, Sophia and Lucas's wedding took place 2 months later, with Clara, now almost a year old, being carried down the church aisle as a small flower girl in Joseph's arms. It was a simple but emotional ceremony, full of tears of joy and promises of a better future. During the reception, I observed my family gathered. Gerald, now with gray hair, but the same kind look as always. Joseph, a grown man, with his girlfriend by his side. Sophia and Lucas, radiant in their newly official happiness. Clara, smiling and clapping in my mother's lap, oblivious to the fact that her mere existence represented the triumph of love over hate, of light over darkness. At that moment, I knew it had been worth it. All the horrors, all the escapes, all the painful secrets, everything had brought us here, to this moment of genuine peace and joy. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. We would forever carry the scars of what we lived through. But it was an honest ending, true, one with sweat and tears and a fierce determination not to let evil have the last word. The years went by. Sophia and Lucas had 2 more children, Anthony and Rebecca, who grew up having Clara as the older sister they adored and respected. We never hid the truth about Clara's origin, but we told it in an age-appropriate way, always emphasizing the love that surrounded her, the family that chose to love her regardless of how she had come into the world. Gerald retired from the garage, which Joseph took over and expanded. I closed the bakery when I turned 70, but I still make my pies for the family on weekends, a tradition that to this day keeps alive a little bit of that Montana girl I once was. My mother passed away peacefully at 92, surrounded by great-grandchildren who adored her and a daughter and granddaughter who had completely forgiven her. My father died in prison in 1998, alone and forgotten. When I received the news, I felt neither joy nor sadness, just a strange relief, like someone who can finally close a book whose dark story no longer has the power to frighten. Today, at 78, sitting here at this little pie stand that my grandchildren insisted on setting up so I could tell my stories, I look back and see a path full of thorns, but also of flowers that bloomed against all odds. I see a frightened girl who became a strong woman, a hopeless young woman who found true love, a desperate mother who managed to protect her daughter, even when the past threatened to repeat its worst page. Clara is 33 now, a pediatrician, married and with a small child. She grew up knowing the whole truth about her birth, but it never defined her, never limited her. On the contrary, it gave her a special compassion for the vulnerable, a sensitivity to others' suffering that makes her an exceptional doctor. The evil my father tried to spread ended up generating, against his will, more goodness in the world. And isn't that how we win, in the end? Not just by surviving, but by transforming our pain into something beautiful, something that helps others, something that leaves the world a little better than we found it? If you've made it this far in my story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to hear accounts like this, just as it's not easy to tell them. But I believe that sharing our wounds, our struggles, and our victories is a way to extend a hand to someone who might be going through something similar, to say, "You are not alone. There is a path ahead. There is light after darkness." If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment below letting me know what city you're watching from. Our channel is called Grandparents' Tales, where we share real stories from grandparents like me every week. Remember always, your past may explain why you are the way you are, but it doesn't determine who you can become. The last page of your story hasn't been written yet, and the pen is in your hand. With love, Grandma Annie.